3 o'clock by the computer, and we'll start our meeting. And here we go. If you would start the recording, please.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello.
All right. I show it's 3 o'clock. Have we started the recording?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you. All right, then. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 3 o'clock on Tuesday, June 7th, 2022. I am Sonny Garza, along with Lisa Clark, our co-chairs of the Livable Places Action Committee. I call this meeting to order as a virtual meeting using Microsoft Teams. A little note, please mute yourself and turn off your camera during the meeting. If you are joining us via telephone, you may use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Committee members, I would remind you that if you would like to speak during the meeting, please use the raise your hand feature or unmute and state your last name so that you may be recognized by the chair. Also, a reminder to those of you who are in this meeting but are not members of the committee, the raise your hand feature is only for committee members, but please feel free to sign up in the chat, and we will call you by name at the end of the meeting during the public session. So, the public comments, excuse me. So, committee members, if you would like to speak again during the meeting, I'm going to ask you to state your name and answer present as I call the roll. So prepare to unmute yourself if you are muted, and we will begin. The chair, Sonny Garza, is present. The co-chair, Lisa Clark,
Present.
is present. Wonderful. Welcome, Lisa. Bradley Pepper. Bradley Pepper is not present. Casey Morgan. Casey Morgan is not present. Curtis Davis. Curtis Davis is not present. Dr. Sherry Smith. Dr. Smith is not present. Sean Masick. Sean Masick is not present. Dustin O'Neill. Dustin O'Neill is not present. Fernando Zamaripa. Mr. Zamaripa is not present. Jeff Kaplan. Jeff Kaplan is not present. Kathy Payton.
Present.
Kathy Payton is present. Thank you. Kirby Liu. Kirby Liu is not present. Lloyd Smith. Lloyd
Present.
Smith is present. Thank you, sir. Luis Guajardo.
Present.
Mr. Guajardo is present. Thank you. Matthew Camp.
Present.
Matthew Camp is present. Thank you. Megan Sigler. Megan Sigler is not present. Mark Nightingale. Mark Nightingale is not present. Mike Dishberger.
Present.
Mike Dishberger is present. Thank you. Neil Dykeman.
Present.
Neil Dykeman is present. Omar Isfar.
Omar Isfar is present.
Omar is present. Thank you, sir. Peter Friedman.
Peter Friedman, present.
Peter Friedman is present. Sandy Stevens. Sandy Stevens. Scott Kubler.
Present.
Scott Kubler is present. Steve Curry. Steve Curry is not present. Toby Cole. Toby Cole is not present. Tyron McDaniel. Mr. McDaniel is not present. Yahaina Mahmood. Ms. Mahmood is not present. Zion Escobar. Zion Escobar is
Present. Escobar present.
there. You are. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
All right. All right, committee members, if you just joined us and you missed your name, please make your presence known now. All right. At this point, I show 12 committee members present for our meeting. Thank you so very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Sandy Stevens has just joined the meeting.
Yes, I didn't want to interrupt you, Sunny.
No,
but
thank you. Thank you, Sandy. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
remember, we're just at the beginning.
Good.
Everyone call right in, call right out. Okay, so again, if any of you missed a roll call and have since joined us, please feel free to speak up and we will add you to the list. A couple of quick instructions that we always go through, and I will do them briefly for people who are new to the meeting. Some best practices for this meeting are these. After joining the meeting, stay muted with your camera off to minimize background disruptions and help with better streaming quality. If you wish to speak, enter your name in the chat and your name will be called in the order received. If you're using a cell phone, again, use *6 to mute and unmute yourself when comments are to be heard at the end of the meeting. When the chair calls on an individual from the public to speak, please state your name and spell your last name out loud unless staff has already done that for you. Again, a verbal recording of this meeting is important, so please speak slowly and clearly. Chat may not be used. The chat option is not to be used for anything other than public speaker requests or basic staff administration about posted agenda items. Again, the hand raised feature is to be used only by committee members and staff to identify their interest in comment or questions. Again, if you are not a committee member and you have a comment or a question, please put your name in the chat and you will be called at the meeting's end. Again, public comments will be heard at the time designated on the agenda, which is at the end of the meeting. And then, of course, when we finish, please disconnect or hang up all devices right after the chair adjourns the meeting. All right, we will begin with the director's report by Director Margaret Wallace-Brown. Director Wallace-Brown.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. Excited to see everyone. I have a couple of announcements about the work of the planning department other than this committee. I want to let you know that City Council approved some changes, the changes that you recommended at the very early onset of this committee work. The technical amendments, City Council approved them in May. And so there are a number of changes to how we establish the calendar for the Planning Commission, public notification for areas for replats and variances, and the 20-day advance notice for some of our work. So council has approved the first tranche of work that you've submitted to them, and we are very pleased. For our applicants, I recommend you go to the website, houstonplanning.com, and look at and what they are so that you can be aware of the changes that are required of our applicants. And then the second thing I want to say is that our Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan open house is coming up on Wednesday, June 15th, and I encourage everyone to attend. We have a number of applications for changes to the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan, and this is your chance to learn about them, to understand what applications we've received for people proposing changes. So those two things are the most important, and you can find anything about what the planning department's doing at houstonplanning.com, and I'm handing it back to the chairman.
All right, thank you, Director Wallace-Brown. And I just remind you that the Major Thoroughfare meeting is virtual, correct?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. It is virtual, and you can get the link to it from our website. It is June 15th from 5:30 to 7:30.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Director. Again, that will be on the 15th, I believe, at 5:30. So I will now, thank you again, Director Wallace-Brown. I will now hand the meeting over to Tammy Williamson. Tammy, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Williamson with planning staff. I'll be facilitating this discussion today. In the agenda for today, we have the announcement of the Transportation Focus Group, an update to the committee on proposed minor revisions to previous recommendations. Am I still sharing the screen? No.
I am seeing it.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
There you go.
Something weird on my screen. Okay.
We've got it.
The proposed recommendations to minor revisions to previous recommendations and recommended changes to a few types of reserves, along with other provisions with Chapter 42's Platting and Development Ordinance. After that, we will present homework activity and expectations for next meeting, and we'll have time for public comments at the end. So to present the transportation focus group topics and meeting dates is Araceli Rodriguez, Planner 3 on staff.
Good afternoon. My name is Araceli Rodriguez. Thank you, Tammy. Today, I'm just simply making an announcement that a small technical committee group has been established to provide guidance on few transportation-related topics. And several participants who are experts on the field will be part of the focus group. But if you would still like to provide additional information, you're more than welcome to join the meetings. Few meetings will be held to discuss on two main topics, and those topics are going to be about 2 points of access and the cul-de-sac length requirements. Information about this scheduled meeting will be available in our Let's Talk Houston website by the end of this week. And then also on August 9th, we will have a presentation with the proposed recommendation given to the committee. This is all the announcement I have for today. And if you have any questions, let me know. If not, I'll give it back to Tammy.
Are there any questions from the committee members about the transportation focus group?
Committee members, are there any questions? Again, this is new, so if you seem a little surprised, that's quite all right, but this is something that you've not seen before. We wanted to give you an announcement that this is going to be moving forward. And as you can see right here, the topics that are going to be discussed. So they tend to be a little more technical, and that's why we've got all these, I'll just say technicians, working on this, and they're going to be our consultants. And then as Araceli said, they will come back to us with their recommendations. All right, so Tammy, do we go back to you?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. The next item on today's agenda is to inform the committee of proposed minor recommendation changes from previously consensus recommendations. So to be more consistent and less confusing, staff recommends that the criteria for minimum parking requirements be adjusted. When multi-unit residential was presented to the committee in January, staff presented the recommendation for minimum parking requirements of 1 space per unit less than or equal to 1,000 square feet and 2 spaces per unit greater than 1,000 square feet. We recommend to change the unit size to bring consistency with the recommendations for narrow lot development standards presented last month, with a threshold of 1,500 square feet. Likewise, for secondary dwelling unit recommendations presented in August of last year, we recommend to change the threshold between requiring 1 additional parking space to 2 parking spaces from 1,200 square feet to 15,000 square feet. The recommendation of not requiring an additional parking space for units of 1,000 square feet or less is still the same. And once again, this is just to be consistent with the recommendations presented for narrow lot developments. Staff was encouraged to also consider adding 1 more criteria for market-based parking for residential developments, in addition to rail stations, high-frequency bus stops, i.e. red line with a service frequency of 15 minutes or better, boost stops, transit stations, and park and ride for all developments within a half-mile distance. We recommend to add blue route bus stops with a service frequency of 20 to 30 minutes within opportunity zones. The Opportunity Zone program was created in 2017 to encourage businesses to develop and invest in economically distressed areas in a manner that ensures benefit to both investors as well as the existing residents and businesses. The governor's office designated 99 census tracts within City of Houston boundaries as opportunity zones. Staff recommends to add this criteria to the market-based parking availability in order for these areas to utilize the benefits of market-based parking for residential developments. The final proposed recommendation change is a result of last month's discussion on narrow lot developments. For lots less than 40 feet wide, instead of the property size threshold being less than 15,000 square feet and then 15,000 square feet or greater, we recommend to change that to be 15,000 square feet or less and then greater than 15,000 square feet. To help make it clear, this flowchart was presented to you last month by Savita as a means to help understand staff's recommendation of what provisions are required for what situation of residential development. The proposed change is highlighted here. Properties of exactly 15,000 square feet or less would now be steered to the left for more options of development types. And yes, this is truly a minor change, but we agree with the committee's comment about the adjustment. Are there any questions before we move to a new topic?
Right. So subcommittee, are there questions? Lisa, did you have your hand up?
I did, but it was for a previous topic, so.
That's perfectly fine. Yes.
No, okay, wasn't that important. Thank you.
I apologize. I didn't see your hand raised. So
If you want, you can send me an email or we can chat about it if you still have the question.
Okay, thanks.
All right, great. Thank you. Again, apologies. I didn't see your hand up. All right. Again, subcommittee members, are there any questions on what you've seen so far? Again, all of this has been presented to you and actually was done based on your recommendations. And as you can see, they are, and I think Tammy, you'll agree, they're mostly technical and verbiage more than anything else. All right. With that, I think we can move on to the next topic, Tammy.
Okay, the next topic on the agenda is discussing a few types of reserves, some problems or gaps in the current ordinance, and staff's recommendation. Staff is looking for consensus from the committee for the proposed recommendations. The City of Houston has two main land classification. One is a lot, single-family residential development, which includes a duplex or a secondary dwelling unit. And the second is a reserve, which is anything other than what meets the definition for single-family residential. The reserve types that we will be discussing mostly occur within single-family development, either in conjunction with or as an amenity to. The first type of reserve to be discussed is compensating open space, or COS. COS is one or more areas on a subdivision plat used for the purpose to reduce the minimum lot size of one or more lots. The intent of COS is as a common open space restricted for the use of the residents of the subdivision when the lot sizes are reduced without restricting lot coverage. The current ordinance requirements for COS are shown on the screen. With the vague requirement of being accessible to all of the residents of the subdivision, there can be and have been an unintended consequence, an example of which is shown on the screen. This recorded and constructed subdivision proposed lots less than the minimum size requirement, so provided COS, but only provided the COS in this one area shown in green outside of the subdivision's perimeter fence, with no means for the residents to access except from the public street with no sidewalk. Many subdivisions do locate their COS within the subdivision, more centrally located and much more accessible, but it is not currently a requirement. Staff recommendation is to provide clear language about what is actually accessible to the residents and to make sure that the intent of COS as usable space and as a community amenity are met. To this end, any COS should be centrally located among the lots needing to utilize the COS for the reduced lot size. If not centrally located, then should not be located on the outside perimeter of the subdivision fence unless pedestrian access is provided to the area. Any provided COS should be usable space, not merely a narrow landscape strip. And the images on the screen are from Memphis and Shelby County Code of various types of open spaces to represent side placement and usability. The next reserve type is reserve restricted to recreation. A recreation reserve is intended to be used for larger community amenities that would propose structures like a swimming pool or clubhouse. The ordinance currently only allows a recreation reserve to have frontage on a public street or type 1 PAE, which is a private street built to public street standards. Staff recommends to extend where a recreation reserve may be proposed to be allowed on type 2 PAE, private street of 28-foot width, and shared driveways, for if these types of developments would like to provide a larger amenity for the residents. All type 2 PAE and shared driveway requirements for maximum length and fire protection must still be met. The third and final reserve type for today's discussion is parking reserves. Chapter 42 currently establishes requirements for the minimum number of additional parking spaces for shared driveways and type 2 PAE subdivisions in the city, dimensional requirements based on the construction code, and the general location requirement of only being located within the subdivision. The ordinance specifies that the parking space should be accessible to all residents of each dwelling unit of the subdivision plat. There have been a few instances where the location of the provided parking reserve or reserves are not accessible to several lots, except if walking around the block outside of the subdivision. Staff recommends to elaborate and define accessible better. We believe that when an additional parking space is required, it is to be located to be walkable within the subdivision from the lots. Another issue with the placement of a parking reserve is when it is proposed immediately adjacent to the edge of the right-of-way. When the parking reserve is adjacent to the edge of the right-of-way, there are two main potential problems. The first is vehicular turning and maneuverability. The example on the screen exhibits the difficulty of traveling on the right-of-way in the opposite direction of the parking reserve, and the maneuverability difficulty when the parking is located too close to the pavement edge. Another difficulty is when the parking reserve is once again located immediately adjacent to the right-of-way edge without taking into consideration the sidewalk ordinance. When the parking reserve is located at the right-of-way edge and there is not the required distance from the edge of pavement to the property line for the safety buffer and sidewalk width, then there is a conflict and could end up requiring a replat to correct the location. Staff recommends that parking reserves not be located adjacent to the right-of-way edge. Are there any questions or comments related to these reserves?
Thank you, Tammy. I actually have two. I've got Neil Dykeman to be followed by Mike Dishberger. So Neil, go ahead, please.
Tammy, question on the first one. So this problem it looks like you're trying to solve is people putting the grass on the outside of the fence, or basically not, essentially useful inside that subdivision itself.
Yes,
like stupid question, why are they putting it there, and why is it outside the fence? I mean, just because it's on the edge doesn't mean it's not accessible, but they've obviously blocked it off. Is there something in the requirements for the fence and the way in something else in the development restrictions that are causing them to do that? And do you know it's just a matter of choice, or is there some other blockage they're trying to get around?
No, most of it is design driven. We have a lot of, this is mostly for new developments, for larger subdivisions where you're creating lots and lots of lots. And a lot of times they do landscape reserves, landscape buffers around their subdivision to kind of create a grass area to separate before you get to backyards or side yards, and for like subdivision monument signs and that sort of thing. And it's just when COS is required, they just say, hey, I already have a space, why not put it here where I'm already wanting to put a buffer?
So are they going to
thinking.
need to do both then? Are you basically going to have to, is that going to cost, for that example, is that going to cost that development twice? And I mean, it strikes me, it's not a bad idea to have your walking trail around the edge, but they've obviously designed it on the other side of a fence, so there's no real access. And there's, and so I'm unclear if you're basically if they're going to have to do that and then put another reserve inside to accomplish their objectives, or if there's some other setbacks or something else that they're going to that they're trying to work around.
I think that was a very unique, is poor grammar, a unique situation. A lot of COS is actually separated into smaller reserves sometimes. I found, actually, I can pull up an example. I just was grabbing this. Can you see this recorded plat on the screen? It's actually an exhibit.
Yes.
Okay, so all of these reserves are also their COS. So sometimes they break it up and do it as these kind of leftover pieces that don't quite make for lots, and that's what they use also for COS. And that can be fine, but you can see like this is still, they're using these also as their COS, which once again, we're getting back to the problem that these aren't really usable because we're going to end up with a fence. And what happened here is they actually built a fence across this, and so you can't access this at all, because it's blocked off everywhere else except if you go all the way back around. So there are ways to incorporate it within the plat. It's just designing it. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess I'm concerned that it sounds like the fix you're describing may make them have to do it twice if they still need that buffer for that type of lot. and is not just switching it from point A to point B, but might increase or reduce the density effectively for what it sounds like is just they're making bad design choices.
Tammy, let me just jump right in here real quick.
Go for it.
Neil, I know that we've got both we've got Mike Dishberger and Lisa Clark, and they both have insight in this. So if I may, let me go to one of them, and then I'll come back to you so that we can make.
I'm good. That my point's made. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, Mike Dishberger, you are up.
Yes, I have 3 comments. Tammy, real quick, so I don't have to look at chapter 42 real quick. What is the minimum lot size for compensating open space? Is it 1,500?
So for in the ETJ at 5,000, if you go under 5,000 is when you would have to have COS, and you could still go all the way down to 1,400. It's just you have to provide more COS.
What about in the city? That's not.
At city, it's 3,500. If you go below 3,500, it requires COS, but you can also use the density option as either or. Exactly.
Okay.
So if you don't want to restrict your density, then you can provide COS instead. It's just, it's a fairly large square footage per ratio for in city.
Okay.
Current.
So my comments are, the first drawing, I can see what they're doing. However, again, I don't do that site, but that's a large development. I can see how the purpose of compensating space is use for everyone, but it's also, I think, beauty and trees and stuff. And the picture you had was horrible, because if I developed that, I would put some trees there and probably a pathway for people to walk. That's what I would have done. And I think if they would have done that, I think everybody here would probably be fine with that, be a dog walk, as long as you, like you said, they don't block off each end of fence. So unfortunately, that's an enforcement problem with the fences, where people will chop off their common area. There's really no inspection for that. You know, honestly, there's no inspection for it, and you have to just trust everyone, but a neighbor could call in on it. So I would, to me, it's going to be very hard to put this down in writing when you say it has to be accessible to everyone, because that, if they didn't have ends on each side, it is accessible. And I can see some beauty in that. Again, if you push the houses back, you know, the other thing the developer could have done is put up another fence between the residential units and the street, which would look ugly. And now, okay, I just solved my problem. I got compensating space here, which it's not good for anyone. So I think we need to see the language on that to really push that through. Second one is, you had a question about parking being accessible, and that is a weird example you had. And well, there's all sorts of examples you guys see in planning. I know that. I would say that most lots need to have the parking accessible, because I've done some inside the city, some 45, 60 unit projects where we had some houses facing the street, a few of them, I know you don't like it, but we had some facing the street, the rest were inside the neighborhood, and we had the parking, and they could still use it. It was on the side. It was probably a little further to walk, but again, to be able to put this in writing and so a developer or builder knows exactly where they can put this stuff is going to be a little hard to write up, and then to say it has to be accessible. What is accessibility? Is it 100 feet, 50 feet, 1,000 feet? Because if you go out into Acres Homes right now, there's some projects there that are 570 foot deep, those lots. They put the parking at either on one end or the other. So is that accessible or not? You know, those are kind of questions we're going to, again, I want to see the language on. I do agree that most of the lots in the neighborhood should be accessible, but if there's an outlier, like 1 out of the 6 is not there, I think we ought to have an exception for that. So maybe that's what you look at. Most deal, but I know our rule is 6. So say, hey, 5 of the homes have to have access. And the third thing is, I have done this a few times too, that turn in on the common drive. You were showing possibly the worst way to access that parking spot, going from the wrong way. But again, can we show that picture? A lot of times that right of way, you're not right on the road. You've got the distance between the street edge and the property edge. Normally it's 12 feet or more in the city, and on bigger streets it's even larger. Like on 20th Street, 19th Street, it's 20 feet deep because of easements and things. So again, I'm not sure I agree with this one, because I think you can get your car in there. It is for guest parking, and because of the width of the road, you're showing a 25 foot wide road there. If you hit it from the 25 foot, you'll have plenty of turning radius to get your car in there. This one I don't agree with, because I think it's going to be, you say a minimum distance. I guess I wouldn't want to see what your minimum is. The example you again show is a curb and gutter street. It is a little more difficult there, but if you came from the other way, or if you didn't have that fence there, that wrought iron fence, maybe that's part of it. Is okay, you can do this, but you have to be so far away from the fence or something so that you can make that turn. Okay, those are my comments.
All right, thank you, Mike. I show Lisa Clark to be followed by Omar Isfar. Lisa.
So the first example, Tammy, and we talked about this a little bit previously. We do say in the verbiage on your slide, it says no compensating open space on the perimeter. I don't agree with that. I'm not the developer that developed your example, but I can see reasons why you would want it depending on what roadway you're on. You may be trying to buffer noise, and you would want that buffer space with landscaping and probably a sidewalk outside of that. Now, I do agree that in those larger areas and along the trailway on the outside of the perimeter, benches, dog walking stations, anything like that to make it a usable space and to have access, maybe an easement through some lot beside this lot, side property line, for access to come through because it was cut off. But I'm really concerned that we're saying no perimeter COS, because there's going to be instances where that's the best option. We don't want to build a bunch of these larger communities in the city or the ETJ and not have a buffer outside of them. We'd lose all the trees that are along the roadway and the bushes and all of the beautification that people have worked to add to the city. And I don't want to see that go away. So that's my largest concern.
Okay, is that the end of your comment, Lisa?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we'll have more discussion after, because I want us to have a discussion about this. It looks like, Omar, I'm coming to you. It looks like we know what we don't want. We don't know how to put what we want into language, as Mike was saying. So, Omar, please, you're next. You are muted, sir. I'm not hearing you.
Thank you,
There
Sonny.
you go.
I wanted to piggyback off Lisa and Mike's concerns, and I think that I like what the city is trying to propose here. I like the idea that COS should be accessible. It really needs to be, but my perspective is that, especially with subdivision platting regulations, they should be extremely objective to the point where you can look at them and know whether your plat's going to be approved or not. And words like accessible are a little bit subjective. And so I think that, for example, when we deal with off-site parking in the off-street parking rules, we have rules that say that an off-site parking lot needs to be so close to the use it's intended to serve, and that this is the way we're going to measure it with the shortest, pedestrian route. And we can look at an off-site lot and say, well, it is accessible because you can walk to it in under 800 feet from this location. And so rather than words like accessible, I like and I don't know what the answer is, but there's got to be some kind of, measurement or metric you can use, like, all the lots within a subdivision that proposes to provide compensating open space, shall be this distance from some portion of a minimum amount of compensating open space, which is accessible by this kind of pedestrian route. I mean, if there were some numbers that would give us some sort of real predictability as to whether a plat is entitled to be approved before it's submitted. I think words like accessible are fine for discretionary approvals, where we can have judgment and we can discuss, whether a particular project supports, sound planning principles. But for something like a subdivision plat, I don't really want the word accessible in it unless it's extremely short, like an abutting access, like a driveway, like a curb cut or something. But for something like this, I think we just need numbers before, as a committee, we can really say whether this is going to work or not. And I want to support Lisa's point about the perimeter compensating open space reserves, because I think that in the example that was shown, that perimeter compensating open space, I agree, is not really too useful. And that the fence really underscores that. But the existence of a fence and the existence of the reserve on the perimeter, it's not necessarily the problem, right? If there were, for example, gates in the fences, so that at least those lots that backed up to the perimeter could access those. And we could, I think that could be some kind of performance standard to allow compensating open space on the perimeter, as long as there were certain, again, definable, objective accessibility standards. That's probably workable, instead of just banning it outright. And that's just sort of what I think. I just think we need some sort of predictable, objective standards that can be applied by a site designer.
All right. Thank you, Omar. Appreciate that. All right. The next speaker is Scott Kubler. Scott?
Thank you. Hearing what the last speaker just had to say, I would add to his comments of including some kind of minimum standards, because for the compensating open spaces, effectively what I'm hearing being discussed is the fact that I could put a very narrow pathway, much like the picture that you have up there, that would be 3 feet wide, and I'm exaggerating, which would effectively make it not usable for anybody. And I think if you put some kind of minimum, if you're going to do something like that, if you make some minimum space so you could put a dog run or something out there to make it actually functional, I think you got something that would be beneficial to everybody. But to create that environment in an effectively unusable space wouldn't make a whole lot of sense.
All right, thank you. Anyone else on the committee have a comment or a question?
And if I may, just to reiterate, that's the current ordinance has that loose term of be accessible. And so that is what we're trying to define much better and more objectively.
Scott, did you have something else? You're just taking your hand down. Okay. So I want to open this, let me turn on my camera here, apologies. I want to open this up for discussion. So I like what, what Lisa Clark specifically and Mike and actually Neil, all of you discussed the fact that it could be used for beautification and it could be used as a buffer. So I'm wondering, as I said earlier, we know what we don't want, and it's harder to say what we want specifically. The examples given here on the slide are really good examples. So I wanted to open this up to discussion. So things like, if you amenitize to X level, then all of it counts as COS or a percentage of it counts as COS. And then we have minimum standards for what those amenities would be. Tammy, just jump right in. Again, I just want to open this up for discussion. Again, we go to a percentage counts if it's amenitized in a certain way. It doesn't count at all. I want to hear what the subcommittee has thoughts are right now. And again, even if you're not familiar with this, I do want you to kind of jump in and give us your thoughts on how this looks to you. So again, feel free to, yes.
Sorry. What you just described is there's another portion that correlates to COS. It's called an open space amenities plan. It's in the ordinance for if you're trying to use COS in conjunction with other things that could conflict, then you provide an amenities plan. It gets recorded with the plat, and there's specific amenities like providing a walkway to and through, providing landscaping, providing a bench, providing decorative features. There's all sorts of a list of amenities to choose from, but it's for very specific instances where it's required in conjunction with COS, as opposed to just whenever you're providing COS, those amenities wouldn't necessarily be required under current ordinance. So just FYI.
All right, so my question is, for that slide where we see the exterior strip and there's no amenities whatsoever, then, do we marry those two things together? And they're not currently married together, but do we marry those two things together? So let me go ahead and call Neil. His hand is up again, and we'll start our discussion. Neil, go right ahead, sir.
So I'd really like to understand what problem we're trying to solve with this adjustment. It seems to me that if you're trying to create a community integrated to itself, obviously it'd be great to have this compensating open space on the interior. If you're trying to either buffer the communities and create communities within communities or integrate communities together, then it would be great to have the open space on the exterior. And I'm not sure I know why we should be trying to legislate that, unless, is there a specific issue that you're trying to get addressed that with this rule change, or is this just kind of thinking through what might be good?
Tammy, I know you have an answer for that. Go right ahead.
So we're trying to get back to the intent of COS. It's when you're reducing your lot size, you're taking away green space from a single resident. And so to do that, you provide a common green space that you can use in lieu of having that space on your own lot. And so that is the whole idea. It's compensating for the open space that should have been on the lot. Well, not should have been, but that to be able to reduce your lot size but not restrict density, you now are potentially have less green space, yard space personally. And so you're providing it within the public space for that subdivision, and it's compensating for that. So it should be a truly usable green space for the residents that have that reduced lot size, not as a landscape buffer. Landscape buffers are absolutely fine. I mean, if that's what the design intent is, but that's not the intent of COS. Does that make sense, Neil?
It does, but I think that seems to be very, very challenging to figure out what to do. As I said, I can see many reasons why you would want the perimeter to be the open space, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the development. And many lots where, like this one, you can see why they did it. They're trying to create some space between the street anyway. So it strikes me that if you simply make this change, you're effectively going to make them have to do what they've done here, plus some more in the middle, which I don't think is the objective of the rule change.
Thank you, Neil. Jennifer, I see you have your hand up and you're muted. There you go. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Jennifer with the planning staff. One of the problems we've seen over time, and probably more on smaller subdivisions, is that when the compensating open space is placed in long strips in the back, and sometimes on the sides, it gets fenced off. The people that abut it included in their yards, and that's if it's facing a street, you don't see that so much, but if it's abutting another development of some kind, so that's one where then it's just lost and people have taken it into their own spaces. So it's partly an enforcement issue, but we really have no mechanism to enforce it once it's happened.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. So again, the idea is that if it's compensating open space, it should be accessible and usable is the bottom line. So I see Scott Kubler. Go ahead.
Thanks. I think what would be helpful is to understand the legal definition of the word usable in this case.
I think that's fair. Yes, absolutely. Do you want that? Do you want that now?
No, not at all.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Omar, I see you. Go right ahead, sir. You are muted, sir.
Thank you, Sonny. I need a little more training with that.
I doubt that. Go ahead, please.
I do think it's really difficult to define something like usable, which is, and I do understand that the current ordinance, says accessible, which has led to, a few conversations between plat applicants and planning about what is or isn't accessible, and they just have to go back and forth, and that's not the kind of review that needs to take place during plat approval. And so I think rather than describe how useful it is, again, minimum standards, metrics, measurements, distances from lots to open space reserves. I mean, I think that that's what would serve, both the city and the development community well.
All right, thank you. Tammy, would you go back to the amenities plan? I understand that you can submit an amenities plan, but I guess my question is, when do you and when don't you? Oh, I'm sorry, before you go on there, I see Dipti with her hands up. Dipti, go right ahead, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Sunny guys. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
So a good conversation happening here. I think I wanted to pitch in about the reasoning this is on the discussion list today. COS, compensating open space, is for an option for reduction in lot sizes, and as Tammy explained, it is allowed in the city limits and in the ETJ, but in the city limits you have an option to do density. So most often or not in the city limits we don't see the use of COS. We do see the use of COS outside the city limits in the ETJ where the option of density is not there. And the intent of the ordinance was to provide a common open space, which was to remain dry and flat and be used by the entire subdivision that was being created. We have seen multiple variants at the Planning Commission regarding the accessibility of COS. So what Omar just mentioned, I think for us at the end of the day to write some standards, maybe the distance requirement and maybe minimum size requirements, which are there. The size requirement is there, but maybe we can get better at it. And distance requirement, I think, is important because we've seen multiple variances in the Planning Commission, and that's why this is on the list, that it should be located in a place where it is reasonably accessible. And so we have done all of those kind of variances. So hopefully with this, all of this discussion will come back to you all with some bullet points again to bring back to your attention and have more discussion on it.
All right, thank you, Dipti. Mr. Smith, Lloyd Smith, I see you with your hand up. Go right ahead, please.
Dipti, I'm glad you mentioned the difference in the way the ordinance spells out compensating open space for inside the city versus outside the city. When you do come back for another run at this, could you explain that in a little more detail and the rationale for that for the committee's consideration?
For sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so very much. All right, so more discussion. And Tammy, again, would you go back to the amenities plan and when that gets used and when it doesn't?
Sure, of course. So in the ordinance currently, there are certain, and it actually spells it out. So the following shall not be used. And so I have this kind of not used for, but there's one of the bullet points is except for provided for, and then the specific section of this code, which is the amenities section, detention pond, drainage ways, waterways, including floodplains and floodways or ravines. So and that's one of them, that if COS is within any of those proposed or existing detention ponds, drainage ways, waterways, including floodplains, floodways, ravines. So that's one of them where an amenities plan would be required. Another is if right now the requirement is that it needs to be dry and flat. Once again, that goes towards being usable and accessible. And if it's not, and then you would need to provide an open space amenities plan approved by the commission. So that's another one. And then another one is if you're combining it with like recreation, if you're trying to propose buildings, we want to make sure that have the layout of it, for the space around some sort of like community space. So those are what would trigger requiring an open space amenities plan. Does that make sense?
It does. So my question is, what's not on that list is obviously if you're doing your COS and it surrounds as a belt, couldn't we say if you're doing that, then you have to, just like we do with anything with detention, or as you said, could we not add that as a criterion? In other words, if you want to do this, it will count, but you have to submit an amenities plan. And we would simply add that. I mean, that might be too simplistic. And again, I'm not a planner, you are. But make that a requirement when you want to do it. So that way it can still be used as COS, but it does force that the amenities plan to be put in place. And that can be policed, can it not?
To an extent, it would be up to the permitting center group, either Houston or the county engineer's office.
Okay.
To require those. It does get recorded with the plat, so it is something that stays with the subdivision.
Excellent. Well, so let me ask the subcommittee again for thoughts. So again, I've got those of you who've already spoken are Neil Dykeman, Mike Dishberger, Lisa Clark, Omar Isfar, Scott Kubler, Lloyd Smith. So if any of you have new ideas, or I'd even brought up to Tammy in our last discussion, if you do that, do we count a percentage of it for compensating open spaces, but not 100% of it? So again, lots to talk about here. The devil, as they say, is in the details. So having heard what you've heard from both Tammy and our other speakers, are there any other comments or questions? So I would say, Tammy, you opened this asking for consensus, and in my mind, I think it might be too early to ask for consensus because there are a lot of questions and a lot of details. So I see Mr. Davis's hands raised. Mr. Davis, are you there?
Yes, I think
go right ahead.
Defining. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead,
Can you
sir.
hear me?
Yes.
Defining what compensation means is important. That is, if a property, a lot size is smaller than one would expect for some level of quality of life, what are the elements that or activities that you seek to compensate? That might be one way to get at this conversation. If it is an activity that is not completely private, that is, there's a shared space, a shared use. Picnic ground is a good example. If you have a picnic bench and a shade gazebo, that could serve a whole community and compensate for not having space to have an outdoor grill in your backyard. So the same is true with a garden. I think because of the variability of what could be defined as compensating, having examples might help get at that, because you're not going to have an exhaustive list that covers the universe. And so when you have the case of a surrounding strip, there may be some conditions in which you define it, that is the proponent for the project, that could be a dog walk, right? And it gets defined in such a way, and there are elements that are designed in that make it an effective dog walk that serves both the development and the surrounding community. So that's my position on it.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. All right, Mike, I see you with your hand raised. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, it just dawned on me at our last meeting we had a really pretty picture of a courtyard project, which has really intrigued me. I think it's a really good concept, but because it's a courtyard style, and I would assume we'd make that central area a common area, I don't think you're going to get enough if you're trying to build smaller homes and get to lots of 1,500 square feet or something, and you want to be everyone does 60% rule most of the time, but that may not be possible on a courtyard project. You're going to have to provide compensating. And I'm just, again, thinking maybe on certain kinds of developments like that, the compensating actually goes down if it's all one big, if it's a courtyard style. Again, definitions are everything, because if you start doing the math on this stuff, I started my pencil here going, man, you're not going to get enough compensating. You have this massive courtyard, or it becomes, your lots have to get bigger and bigger to meet the 60% rule. So I would like us to consider that, and maybe just on that style home only. And again, it's hard to define. And as builders or developers, we're always looking for exact things, exact meanings and things. But think about that. Take that drawing that y'all had shown either the last meeting or the meeting before, and figure it out and say, God, you know what? There's not enough compensating even with this beautiful courtyard style project here. This would never work. And it didn't dawn on me when I first saw it, because I was concerned about, access and parking and all that stuff. So have y'all looked at that, Tammy?
So the courtyard style, it would be a performance center to house what we're proposing, and there is no minimum lot size. So there wouldn't be a need to try to figure out the COS part of it. It's just that you would have to meet the minimum requirements of the open space that is part of what the language for the courtyard style development would be. It wouldn't have anything to do with the required COS, this amount square feet if you're reducing your lot size by this much.
Good to hear. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Tammy. All right, I do not see any other hands raised. So again, comments from the committee and questions. So Tammy, I know you've been taking notes. So it sounds like, I think Neil was talking about, are we doubling the COS, which it sounds like he doesn't want to do that, obviously. You know, if you do a ring around the property and then have to do something within. Mike, you just heard Mike was actually talking about language of the ordinance. Lisa was talking about the benefits of that surround. So Lisa, we might come back to you with questions about what, you know, what those amenities might look like so that you as a developer, the developers get what they want from the standpoint of the amenities and allow the residents to take advantage of those. Because as you said, it enhances the beauty of the development as you drive in and you've got, you know, trees and shrubbery and amenities. And also, as you said, for even blocking noise. Omar wanted really specifics, you know, because he, you know, what is exactly accessible? We need a measurement. We need hard numbers. Scott also talked about predictability. Scott talked about amenities again. And then Commissioner Smith, what I was so enthralled by your question that I neglected to write it down.
Oh, it's the general idea that the lot size and the compensating open space sections of Chapter 42 make distinctions between inside the city and in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So as we were discussing compensating open space here, I'd ask that when it come back, there's a refresher and the committee's consideration as to whether those distinctions should be maintained.
So you can see why I did not take notes on that. That's way over my pay grade, sir, but thank you. All right. Anyone else? Tammy, did you have any questions of any of the committee members at this point in time?
I do not.
So let's say if we're going to move on, what is your expectation? You would come back to the next meeting to answer some of these questions, I would assume, and at that point in time, ask for consensus?
That sounds good. Should it be all of the reserve pieces or just a few of the reserve pieces? So obviously the COS, are we good for the parking? I mean, not the parking, the recreation reserve?
Actually, if you don't mind yes, thank you. Let's walk through them again and ask questions on each one. So if you would just have an overview of each one, and we could take more questions.
Okay, so the first one we talked about was COS, which was most of the discussion with the committee. And then the second reserve type is on your screen, the recreation reserve, where instead of just limiting recreation reserve to the public street type or type 1, to be able to have the ability to have the recreation reserve also be located on a type 2 PAE and a shared driveway with still the same sizes.
Are there, I see Neil Dykeman. Neil, did you have a question or a comment?
So on this, similar to what you were doing on the courtyard, I guess you're attempting to not limit it to you being fit on an existing street. Do you really care where it is as long as there's a footpath to it? Isn't that the goal? Is that accessible, but not by a car? You know, why does it even need to touch a street at all to accomplish this?
So the recreation reserve is intended for the larger amenities. So you're going to end up, obviously it is a community, still a community base, so you can still bicycle, you can still walk, but it is a larger facility because otherwise you can accomplish the same thing on like an open space reserve. So having an abutting side so it doesn't get locked out from being accessible is the intent on having it have frontage on at least something that is public domain.
And again, I would ask, why don't you simply add footpath to this? Because it seems like, if the goal is a central recreation reserve, and to take the prior committee members' comment on, basically a gazebo, an eating space, do you actually need a car there? I mean, pocket parks, you don't really need, in some of these little pocket parks, you don't really need a lot of car access. And for smaller subdivisions, that might be counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish here on the walkability side.
Right, a lot of the pocket parks.
I'm just saying, are you going far enough?
The pocket parks and like small playground areas, they don't have to be platted as a recreation reserve. They can be platted as an open space, and there is no frontage requirement. So this is a larger space with more intense use. And so if it's just a footpath, what land are you traversing through to get to it?
A footpath is a lot easier to fit into a development than a new street, for example. I'm just, as I said, I like what you're doing here. I'm just questioning, does it even need to be on a secondary street? Can you simply, as long as it has access, wouldn't it meet the objectives that we're trying to accomplish?
Do you
So
want to?
Tammy, if I may, so what we're actually doing here, Neil, is as you can see from the grid above, today it's a public street or a type 1 permanent access easement, period. So it's the current ordinance is much more restrictive, and as you say, today they were trying to add a type 2 PAE and a shared driveway with a minimum footage of 50. So so as you can see, we're trying to expand access to it. But you make a point that I'm sure that Tammy will take into consideration. I see Dipti with her hand up. Mike, I'll get to you momentarily. Dipti, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, yes, like you said, we are just wanting to expand the requirements. Currently, the requirements are pretty stringent. If you are providing for, or if you're making a type 2 PAE project, which are those private streets projects, you actually cannot have a recreational reserve. Your recreational reserve has to be on the public street. Similarly with the shared driveway project. These two projects tend to not have a recreational reserve, generally because these are smaller kind of projects. But as we increase, as we see more and more of this happening in the city and outside, we were as we are looking at the reserve section, we felt that making it further open, so these recreational reserves could be provided within the type 2 PAE developments and shared driveways was the reason to put this on on this agenda for your discussion.
And Dipti, also we're talking about, since this is well, Dipti and Tammy, since this is a larger thing, it could have pools, tennis courts, and you're going to need vehicular access to it versus
yes,
a walking path.
Yes, and maintenance, especially, yeah. So these are larger areas, like Tammy mentioned also. So most often or not, these will have some sort of a PAE connection, driveway connection, because they're parking, but also for maintenance. So it is not something that it will only have access to a pedestrian pathway. But I got Neil's comment that maybe not all lots should have access to it, but I think that's not what we were mentioning anyways. We were trying to say that the recreational reserve itself can have access and frontage on a PAE or a shared driveway, not that all lots should have access to the recreational reserve.
All right, got it. All right, let me go to Mike Dishberger next. Mike, go ahead, please.
Samita, my comment is, why don't we make it on the shared driveway at like 28 feet to match a shared driveway? I've done these in the past. We call them common areas, like you were saying, but I've done some bigger neighborhoods in Houston, and I call them pocket parks because they end up being in corners sometimes where you really don't want to waste doing a bunch of cul-de-sac lots. You put a park there and you have 28 feet, 30 feet of access, and I built the gazebos, I built the barbecue pits, the picnic tables, and pickleball thing one time. And on a T driveway, if you do a really big T driveway, at the very end of the T, it's 28 feet wide usually, or maybe 18, but 28 sounds like a better number because then the land spreads out both ways on each side of that T. I've done these before. We've called them other things. If you're going to revise it on the shared driveway part, I would consider the 28 feet because you can still put a car there. And these are places normally that people just walk to in the neighborhood. Pools are a different situation. I don't see 5,000 square feet, so I can get too much of a pool there with a pool house. So that's just a comment. I know we're making it better. Why don't we get it down to 28 feet? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. All right, anyone else? All right, Tammy, you have your marching orders. Okay, the next
And
section.
then, yeah, well, the last reserve type was the parking.
Okay, yes, and this was the, we were talking about for the, 6 units and more, and where you have to, where the ordinance currently requires that they provide parking, and the question is, where is it? So you were saying X amount of distance from the right-of-way, I believe. That's where Mike had some notes. I guess it's the last slide that you showed on this section, this one. No, the one before that, sorry. That one. So do we want to walk through these one at a time and take comments, or shall we just open the floor? Comments from the subcommittee? All right. What was the minimum distance on this slide, Tammy, from the right-of-way?
We were just saying not located immediately adjacent to.
Okay, there wasn't a hard number there.
No, sir.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, questions on reserves parking?
Yes, I have one.
Mr. Smith, go right ahead, please.
So Tammy, help me understand the nuisance or the problem we're trying to solve here. The visitors here would be backing out into a local street. There's 2 or 3 spaces. If they turn over once an hour, you're talking about 2 or 3 cars backing out once in a while, which is a very different thing from every vehicle in this larger subdivision having to back out. What challenge are we trying to solve here by this requirement?
A 5-point turn to get into the parking space would be one, because it's not just on local streets. Like this example on Tidwell, that's a major thoroughfare, and it's medianed, and it was only about the edge of curb to the parking was only about 10 to 12 feet. And so this is a specific example, but because it's medianed, you can only travel in one direction, and then you're having to turn a 180 within just 12 feet of space. You're having to actually multiple point turn to get yourself into a parking space. And so we want to be able to move it off of the right-of-way line, one, for just being able to have a cleaner turning maneuverability instead of wiggling yourself in, and then also for the sidewalk ordinance required in the city. That if the edge of pavement to the property line isn't the minimum requirement, and then suddenly there's a conflict to where the sidewalk would need to go and where the parking reserve currently exists. Does that make sense?
Not entirely. The sidewalk would be in the public right of way, not within the reserve. They wouldn't overlap in any circumstance I could think of.
Sometimes they do a sidewalk easement within the public or within the private property to be able to meet the sidewalk ordinance.
Okay. Well, I'll just observe in the example you gave is a divided street where the one-way U-turn issue particularly applies. That's one very small subset of public streets. So I'm not sure I understand that the concern would apply in every public street as opposed to either certain classifications of streets or certain geometric configurations like being divided with the one-way traffic. So give some further thought as to how one might either address that through differential distance requirements or through a different definition of public street, moving to something that's less all-inclusive.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Smith. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. And so, Tammy, is that all of it?
That is all of the reserves. And then we have some other changes.
Right. Okay. So before we go there, last chance, ladies and gentlemen, to ask a question, make a comment, ask for something specific, because we want Tammy to be able to come back to the next meeting with, the hard data that you've asked for. All right. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So let's go on then, Tammy.
Okay. So the next topic is miscellaneous chapter 42 amendments. I know I don't like the term miscellaneous, but that's some bits and pieces. Okay, so replat applications that require a public hearing and notice to adjacent property owners pursuant to Texas Local Government Code 212 are currently not allowed to submit as a Class 2 replat and are thus required to be classified as a Class 3 replat. Class 3 plats require both preliminary and final applications as separate submittals and consideration before the Planning Commission, while a Class 2 plat application is a final application in one submittal. Staff recommends to remove the last bullet point that eliminates public hearing applications from automatically being able to qualify as a Class 2 replat. So, if a proposed application meets the criteria as a Class 2 plat, then it may receive approval from Planning Commission as a final application at the close of its public hearing. If a public hearing application is proposing a street or infrastructure easement, then it will still be required to be submitted as a Class 3 replat. The intent for Class 3 applications receiving separate preliminary and final approvals is for the applicant to have a preliminary approval before expending time and money on the engineering that is required when proposing streets or infrastructure easements. Allowing a public hearing applications that would otherwise meet the criteria of a Class 2 replat to be approved in one submittal will not adversely affect the public. They're only notified on the preliminary, not the final, nor the city's ability to review and determine conformance with applicable ordinances and codes. This proposal would not violate Chapter 212. For clarity, public hearing applications, when currently submitted as a preliminary application, do not require a title report be submitted until its final application. This would change where a title report would need to be submitted with a Class 2 with notice application and would still receive the separate legal review for deed restrictions. This meets the current submittal requirements for a Class 2 application. I know that was a lot.
That's a lot, Tammy. Basically, what this is doing is streamlining both for the planning department and for the applicants.
Absolutely. That
right.
Having two submittals for otherwise relatively simple plats is just a waste of time. And yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work that's really not necessary on anyone's part, either by the developer or by the planning department. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, questions. There's a lot, as Tammy said, there to discuss, but the gist of it is we're basically streamlining this the Class 2 and Class 3s to make it easier and simpler for developers and of course for the planning department to get through these and not require notification and a public hearing. So questions, everyone? Comments? Then I see none. Tammy, do we want consensus on this?
Sure.
Why not?
There's still a couple other of the miscellaneous Chapter 42, but we can go piece by piece because they are.
No need. I mean, this is, to me, in my mind, this is technical and streamlining. Unless we have a specific problem that anyone sees, I think we can move forward. Anyone? Okay, let's just move on then. Thank you for this.
Okay. So another topic is an inconsistency between what is permitted or required in shared driveway designs and the minimum lot width requirement. The two diagrams on the screen are taken from Chapter 42. The one on the left allows for perpendicular access of one of the lots on the end of the shared driveway, either 18 feet or 16 feet, under specific conditions. The diagram on the right illustrates the required design of a T turnaround for 16-foot shared driveways, with each branch of the T must be exactly 16 feet. Despite these two examples, the ordinance specifies that the minimum lot width is 20 feet, unless meeting more difficult requirements for lot width averaging. And staff recommends to add an allowance in the ordinance to allow a reduced lot width frontage when these two very specific cases are being met. We are not proposing any changes to the shared driveway part of the ordinance. Are there any questions about that?
Questions? Ladies and gentlemen, I see no questions. Comments? Does all make sense to everyone? Okay, let's move forward, Tammy.
Okay, so I'll now invite Lynn Henson to discuss proposed technical amendments to the special minimum lot size and special minimum building line portions of the ordinance.
Thank you. Lynn, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go right ahead, please.
committee members. Within the special minimum building line and special minimum lot size ordinances, we do have some proposed technical amendments. They are minor wording changes that will help make the language more consistent within the ordinance and to clarify certain instances. I want to reiterate that these technical amendments will not change in any way the intent of the ordinance, and it will not change the application criteria, the analysis, the process, or the restrictions in the ordinance. Thank you. So what we have on the screen are two examples. The first one is the example of the special minimum building line amendment. In 42-179B, under the section that speaks to rules governing subdivision plats, development plats, and building permits, the original language states that a subdivision plat, development plat, or building permit that is filed with the department shall not be approved if it provides for a building line that is less than or equal to the special minimum building line that's established. The way it is stated that states that a building could not be built at the minimum building line that would be established. By simply removing the words or equal to, that would allow a structure to be built at whatever the minimum special building line is set by the ordinance or greater. We feel that this would not change the intent of the ordinance and would allow the original intent. The second example is the special minimum lot size. Under 42-199B1, which speaks to application review, the original language states, within 2 business days, update the list of special building minimum lot size applications and designations. Because this falls under the special minimum lot size, the word building should not be in this section. The special minimum building line application review falls in another section of the ordinance. Are there any questions about these examples?
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, any questions? So this is really more, language and technicalities. Again, as Lynn said, it doesn't change anything currently in the criteria for either of these ordinances. So are there comments or questions? All right, great presentation, Lynn. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tammy, what do we have next? Lynn again.
Next is Lynn again.
Lynn, would you please tell us about homework activity in our next meeting?
Yes. So the survey that is online refers to the presentation that was presented at the last May 11th Livable Places Action Committee meeting. And those recommendations are listed on letstalkhouston.org for the public to review. If anyone has or wants to make comments on these recommendations, the survey is still open, and I urge you, for those that have already filled out the survey, to share it with interested parties that may want to comment. The website even offers an easy opportunity for you to share that information. There are buttons available so that you can share it on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and via email. Also, the staff would like that the committee and the public to consider allowing presentations to be made on these recommendations that you've heard, both at the last Livable Places Action Committee meeting and today. The planning department can come out to your civic group, your professional association, or other organizations to discuss these recommendations. So if you would like to request a presentation or you have recommendations of who the staff can talk to, please call Tammy Williamson at 832-393-6600. That's the main number for the planning department. Also, we do have an article that is posted on letstalkhouston.org. It's actually a short video by Stuart Hicks. He's an architectural design educator and associate professor at the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois in Chicago. His YouTube is entitled, "This is What Makes Good Cities Great." And it takes a look at the history and interesting uses of alleys. Professor Hicks explains that, quote, "Alleys are the unsung heroes of urban planning and design." You can find this link to the YouTube on letstalkhouston.org/livable-places. And unless there are questions, I can turn it back over to Ms. Williamson.
All right, thank you, Lynn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, any questions for Lynn? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move forward. Tammy, I think the last thing is public comments.
And an announcement that our next Livable Places meeting, Action Committee meeting, is July 12th at 3 p.m. And then, yes, we are ready for public comments.
All right, so remember to mark your calendars for another exciting meeting of Livable Places. Remember, it's wonderful work we're all doing here, so I appreciate all of you being here. So now we'll go to public comment. Mr. Calvert, do we have people signed in the chat to speak?
No one at this time has signed up for public comment.
All right, let me just make a note here. If you are listening in and you have a comment or a question for staff, now would be the time to do that. So if you've not put your name in the chat and you are listening in, please announce yourself, spell your last name, and we'll take your question or comment. Is there anyone who has a question or comment for Livable Places Subcommittee?
Yes, please.
Who's speaking?
This is Mark Williamson, Williamson. First comment is that for some reason, whenever I come into these meetings on Teams, I don't have a chat in which to drop my name. And this is a technical issue that someone on staff was supposed to be looking into a couple of months ago, and I never heard back. But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to inquire if there was any way at all that while we're visiting the special minimum lot size ordinance, we could fix the glitch that somehow allows an old ordinance, which minimum lot size block, which never had any land use component at all, to override a newer minimum lot size area, which does have a land use component. The exact legal reasoning is lost on me, why that should be so, and I'm just looking for a fix other than for waiting for all the old minimum blocks to expire or the new renewals to include killing the old ordinance. It's a mess. It shouldn't have been allowed to happen. It's caused some problems in our area, the Heights. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. And again, apologies for not being able to use the chat, but that's why I asked if there's anyone listening. So thank you so very much for being here today and for your question. Tammy, did you understand Mark's question or comment so that we can get to work on that?
I do, yes.
Great. All right. All right. Again, Mr. Calvert, I don't see anyone in the chat. Do you?
Yes, we have Melissa Beeler signed up to speak now.
All right, Ms. Beeler, are you there?
Yes.
Go. Yes, go right ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
Great. My name is Melissa Beeler. I'm with Air Alliance Houston, last name Beeler. And I just wanted to say, super appreciate everything. I'm also really glad that Lynn went over how to request a presentation for community groups, because I have several groups I think would be really great to hear from on the recommendations. And I also would love to see like a full engagement timeline or overview. I believe last month we talked about maybe like the summer we're phasing into engagement for this whole initiative. So I'd really love to know what all is planned for the next 3 to 6 months, just so that communities can be aware of how they can engage. And I also thought it was really fun to hear the main quote of this meeting being kind of, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So I hope that community presentations can definitely help us maybe crystallize that, but also it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for communities to help us understand what the problem we're trying to solve is still. There was a lot of judgment calls being made today about wanting landscape buffers in ETJ, or what activities we're doing in shared open space. So I think community voices can help us get there. Thank you.
All right, thank you so very much. Mr. Calvert, anyone else?
No one else is signed to speak.
All right, thank you. Again, I'll open the floor. If there's anyone who is listening in who would like to address the committee, please take a moment now to unmute, state your name, and be recognized by the chair. Anyone? All right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will officially adjourn this meeting of the Livable Places Action Committee. Thank you very much so for all of you being here. We appreciate all of your input, those of you who are in the committee, and those of you who are not. We appreciate your taking all your time and being here with us today. And I forgot to turn my camera on. So that disembodied voice was me. Thank you again for being here. Again, congratulations to staff on a wonderful meeting. And we look forward to the next meeting in July and seeing what you'll be presenting at that time to the committee. Thank you all. Again, I'll adjourn the meeting now. Have a great week. Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye
you all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.